Well, welcome back to these constant contact videos. Today, I'm going to speak towards what does the Bible say about particularly God's agape love, and this is just a one angle by which we can go at it. As we've gone through Genesis, and it would be easy to go through the line coming from Adam and then arrive to Genesis 6 to Noah, where it says in the first 8 verses of chapter 6 in Genesis, "Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters are born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women, and they took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth, for whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. So the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing. All the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I'm sorry I ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord." Now, I mentioned this last weekend that I joined a social media group called Christian Apologetic. And there was one person who posted on that page that basically said that they had had a deconstructing and they no longer believed in the God of the Bible, specifically because and centered around the Noah story. And if I were to break down their argument, they said, first and foremost, that they proposed that the event probably didn't happen, that the flood didn't actually happen. And if it did happen, it was most certainly not a worldwide flood. Second, if the event did happen, then God is an evil dictator who does not have the goodwill of his creation in mind. Third, this led them to suggest that Jesus, in referring to a non-historical event or to the event of Noah, which in Matthew 24:36-44 reads in the following way, "However, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen. Not even the angels, even the Son of Man, only the Father knows. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day. In those days, before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. 2 men will be working in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. So you must keep watch, for the day of the Lord is coming." So this led the person to say that in Jesus referring to the time of Noah and to these horrific events, that either one, he referred to an event that never actually happened, or two, he referred to just a terrible event, and this is not really a God worth following. So he suggested the Bible cannot be inerrant, or in other words, he's saying that the Bible is a fallible document. Now, my hope today is to speak a little to each one of these points. So, and then I also want to talk a little bit about how it would be easy to label this video, what does the Bible say about God's wrath? But I'm going to say no, that this actually points us to God's agape love and even righteousness. Now, first and foremost, did the flood actually happen? There is 2 systems of thought within even Christian scholarship that says, first, either Noah was not a historical event that actually happened, but rather a type of hyperbole, maybe even a parable of sorts meant to teach the Jews a certain concept. Other camps might suggest that if Noah did happen, then it was actually a localized flood at best. I find both of these understandings flawed and at the very least fallen short of what actually happened. First and foremost, I believe that Noah was a historical event as Moses records it. I mean, first, one of the reasons that I believe this is because other Middle Eastern narratives talk about a flood as well, giving merit to that it was an event that actually happened. Now, some people will suggest that these stories are very similar, and so maybe even Noah wasn't original and that it was actually built on the other stories. But if you start to read the different events, especially the Babylonian narrative around Gilgamesh, you'll find that these stories have unique insights that suggest that they're not stories that are repeating one another with different names and different locations, but rather they are different testimonies of the same event in terms of they all had these different experiences in the same event that was the flood. So there is historical evidence that the flood actually happen. Second, I once read an article, and I think I've mentioned this before in these videos, by Discover magazines that said archaeologists and scientists were finding, this was in the late 90s that I read this article, that they were finding meteorite particles found in the Gulf of Mexico. And this led to the theory that the Gulf of Mexico was probably a formed geographical area rather than maybe something that was created or came with the original notion of creation. They went on to say, though, that if such a meteor in fact formed the Gulf of Mexico, then it would have created a worldwide flood, a distribution of water across all of the earth. So, with these two things in mind, this gives us both a historical evidence and scientific evidence to support the biblical account of Noah. Now, what type of God then, this is the next question, what type of God sends the flood? The easiest answer to this is the God of the Bible. As I pointed out before, in creation, God told Adam and Eve that if they ate of the forbidden fruit, then they would surely die. Now, Adam and Eve, with the fall, are able to die. They're no longer eternal, or they will die. They won't live forever, so to speak. They have a start, but originally they were not supposed to have an ending. Well, with the fall comes an ending. But God does not wipe them from the face of the earth, as he would have been in the right to do, as he had both warned and the punishment that would have actually carried through what he promised. And now, so when you get to the beginning of the account of Noah, it shows us how far humanity has fallen in just 3 brief chapters. Now, of course, it goes through the ancestry going from Adam to Noah, but in terms of Genesis, we haven't read that far. And then we read that God repents over even creating humankind. His heart was broken. He was saddened to his core that humanity had become this way. So now he has every right to carry out the consequence he first gave humanity. So the consequence of sin is most certainly death. Of this we have been warned. But it would appear that by the time of Noah, humanity could care less about God's judgment. And then we question God's notion of being in the right. I asked the particular individual on social media, what would it look like that if a person committed murder? Like, what would justice look like in that situation? Should we be gracious to that individual? Do they deserve punishment of some sort? Should it be an eye for an eye? Should we take their life since they themselves took someone else's life? What would a just ruling look like in that situation? And of course, they never answered that question. Because Romans, if you look at what the Bible says, it goes on to suggest that God is righteous, is holy, and is in the right for judging our sin to create, in order that he would create a just system where there is no longer any sin, from even murder to something as simple as what we might call lying. So whenever someone cries out for justice, we often focus on this notion of God as love, and we assume this is an all-accepting love that's actually more akin to John Lennon's song, Imagine. Yet in that very song, Lennon essentially suggests, can you imagine a world without religion? And maybe even is indirectly, I would say actually that it's doing so directly, blaming God for all the wrongs of the world. And so it actually removes any sense of justice for the sake of love. And I would argue that this is not love, that, or at least not perfect love, certainly not agape love. What we often ignore of who God is that God's love includes his justice as well as his grace and mercy. So then we are offended by justice when God acts rightly, and we get caught up in the notion of who is this God and why would we worship him. Finally, God judges. Paul tells us that God, as the potter, God as the creator, has every right to judge and to even throw out the clay, the product that he would use to create for the sake of a better product, and he would still be in the right. And it is not our position to question that as the clay. What is absolutely amazing to me is that in the midst of the human depravity that we see in Genesis 6 and the Noah account, God would look and find anyone who is worth saving and then call out Noah and his family, apart from the rest of the clay, that they wouldn't throw all of the clay out, but that he would save some, but not others. So, in that, I think we see God's grace and mercy that he would save anyone. Now, briefly, in regards to Jesus' own statement about the times of Noah, first and foremost, if the event of Noah didn't historically happen, that does not discount what Jesus says about the event. But I believe I've already showed why this is a event that happened in human history. What Jesus is doing is he's using the story, this historical testimony, to generate belief amongst the unbelieving generation that, of course, have asked previously for a sign, but even when a sign was given, they missed it entirely. People in Noah's day were oblivious of the judgment that was coming and was rightfully coming, and so were caught unaware when that judgment did and when God acted. Yet, just in the times of Noah, where God delivers those he has called and elected through the waters, so also can we be called and delivered through the waters of baptism to go from deserving of God's wrath to enjoy a new creation through Christ Jesus. This is what Christ is trying to get our attention to, is to be awake, to be aware, and to accept what Jesus is doing. Jesus is employing the people to turn from their sin, for us to turn from our sin and the consequence that will surely come from it, to believe in his name and be delivered. The final thing that I will say is that I would struggle to believe in a God that might send the flood and even kill babies. This was something that the person was very focused on. They asked the question a couple different times, why would God kill even the babies? Now, this is a misunderstanding of sin in general, that we have all sinned and fallen short of God, but somehow we separate babies and we call them innocent and undeserving. God doesn't separate any part of humanity, that we are sinful through and through. But in both Judaism and Islam, if you actually look at them on their own, they are actually far more militant religions, putting a major emphasis on Yahweh in the course of Judaism, or Allah in the notion of Islam, to the point of this idea of either follow, bow down, and worship, or be killed or perish. I wouldn't want to worship this type of Lord either. And this type of Lord is so needy and even egotistic that it seems like that God exists or fails based on who worships them. And so there's this whole guilt treatment and almost forceful belief that just doesn't work. But I'm amazed at God's agape love shown through Christianity. For just as Yahweh, the Old Testament, equally repented and never again flood the earth, the notion of God's judgment never is completely dealt with in Judaism. All of the creation is still subject to death by the end of the Old Testament. When you go to the continuation of the New Testament, though, it offers something quite unique. It is said that every other religion we have to somehow try to get and earn our way to God. But in Christianity, God comes to us through Jesus, but then takes on, Jesus, of course, takes on our punishment in our stead to then deliver us from the consequence of that very punishment. All of which points us to what the Bible has to say about God's agape love. For Jesus, for he became sin who knew no sin, that he might become our righteousness. Ultimately, in what we might see as terrible events, God delivers, and God even offers a portion of himself through the face of his Son to die for us. What an amazing contrast, what amazing grace, what amazing love is this. I hope that this is a blessing to you. Now we're going to take after this week, we're going to take the last week of July and the first week of August off from the Constant Contact. I'm going to be out of town first, and then Steve's going to be out of town, so we're just going to take a little break from this. But when we return, we're going to continue with this series of what does the Bible say about, and I hope that this has been helpful as we go through this systematic approach. So I hope to see you the rest of this week. Certainly love to see you on Sunday. Then after that, I'm going to be on vacation, and I hope to not see you then. I hope that you guys are having a great summer. God bless, and we'll see you very soon.